Hello, I'm Lauren Huffmaster and I'm with Jessica Buscho, and we are both living with stage 4 cancer. And we want to have ongoing conversations. We want to lead ongoing conversations around the cancer experience. And so every week we're picking one idea that is common between all cancers around the cancer experience. And we're doing these conversations in honor of friends of ours that have died during 2020. Because, like most people, I think in our whole world, there was a lot of loss in 2020 that wasn't properly mourned. And without many options because of quarantines, um, it leaves us looking for creative ways to honor our friends and family. And so today we're going to talk, Jessica and I are going to talk, and we're going to talk about our emotional response, a patient's or survivor's emotional response around scans. So, hi, Jessica, how are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Good. Now,
Just
just
got back from scans, so I'm trying to get back into that from the high worry mode back to relax mode for a couple weeks.
yeah, exactly. So Jessica was just going through scans, and we tried to meet earlier while she was literally on the road to treatment and couldn't get a good connection, so we postponed. But Jessica travels from her home in the Bay Area down to LA to receive her treatments, and she has to do much of her life on the road to treatment, which is why we named our conversations by that name. So Jessica, tell me how are you feeling the weeks leading up to your scans?
Um, it definitely increases as the time goes and I get closer. I usually notice a change in my behaviors before I even notice the actual feeling in myself. I'm kind of like a busy person, so I notice I tend to take on little projects at home. So we've called them like scanxiety projects. Um, and it's kind of funny because some of them are small and like some of them, like I had big scans coming in December and I redid my kid's bathroom. So that's how I process it. But for me, that's sort of like how I lead into scans. And then as I get closer to the scan, it becomes more acutely emotional and I can be irritable or short or just um, a little uh, more sensitive, I guess. I think those are the times when I really struggle. If I see people, especially complaints by people, it's sort of like agitates me a little more than it normally would. And, like I understand everyone in life has hardship. And I think that especially leading up to scans, it's pretty easy to start thinking a little less rationally and start to just be a little bit more snippy.
Yeah, stress can do that to a person for sure. But why do you think, can you tell us why, if someone is not impacted by cancer, can you explain to that person why scans are such a big issue?
Yeah, so I say this all the time when people ask how I'm doing. I talk about the rhythm of scans. The clinical trial that I happen to be on has scans every 6 weeks, which is extremely frequent. When you're on standard of care treatment, it's closer to every 8 or 12 weeks. Um, so every 6 weeks, you go through this sort of like worry, and the worry is that treatment could be not working anymore, or if you're someone that has a good response and you maybe were off treatment, maybe this scan might indicate a return to treatment. Or if you're someone that was diagnosed early stage, um, maybe it means you have a recurrence. So it's something that's universal across all types of or all stages of cancer. But I think particularly for people with stage 4 cancer, when you never really have this break, it's like every 6, 8, 12 weeks, you're like, okay, well, is this the week that I have to find new treatment? Or is this the week that I find out that things aren't working? Because for the most part, in that short period of time, your cancer wouldn't change enough to give you symptoms. So the scans are really the first indication, aside from some cancers that can be tracked with blood labs, that a treatment may not be working or as effective anymore.
When I think about scans, I think about how every time we go through a scan, it takes us back to that very first time. The very first time when we didn't know that anything was wrong, and we go in, and in that moment, from that laying on that machine, waiting for that call, that's when our life changed. And so I think psychologically, a lot of the trauma, a lot of the stress and anxiety around scans is because we have to continually go back to that initial moment. And every single scan takes us emotionally back to that first time our life got changed forever.
Yeah, and I have colorectal cancer, but it was diagnosed via a scan, which is really unusual because it was already metastatic and I was having other symptoms at the time. But I never really thought I had cancer. So I think that's an important point that you bring up, that the shock of that moment when I was there with the um, radiology techs and everything, they came out just to ask me a few kind of odd questions. Do you have a history of lung disease, or is there any pertinent medical history you want to tell us, before my life turned upside down, right? So there's that. And then if you're a long-term survivor, um, like both of us are at this point, I think if you make it past a little bit, you're doing a great job. I There's that change in treatment where you have the same sort of thing happen, right? So it's out of your control. The scans are not good. You have to change treatment. Um, so it's sort of like a re-injury. So the anticipation of that, so some people call it scan anticipation or scan anxiety, um, is pretty palpable.
Definitely. And because it is sort of an abstract response, and it doesn't seem logical that going in for like an hour-long scan should have this week before, week after, huge upheaval of emotions. But there's so much to process. There's so much fear about what you can plan the following week of the scan, right? I mean, you go in for this scan, and what if it changes my whole next month? And you start to look forward into your life and say, well, what if this scan makes me not be able to do all of those things coming up? And so it's not just this processing of mourning a possible progression or possible end of treatment. It's really all of a sudden you have like the weight of giving up your future all over again, and not knowing what you're going to, how you're going to do that, how you're going to process that in this moment. um, there's a lot going on, and it's hard to explain, like, why are you upset about something coming up in 3 weeks when all you're going to do is go in for this scan, right? But there's just all this anticipation of the what ifs, because in cancer there's this idea of what if it comes back, what if it grows, what if it continues. It's just hangs over you for such an extended period of time. 5 to 10 years, they're saying now, is this window when it could come back. And so every single scan is this when this possible return would occur, when they would find it.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about the importance of planning ahead in one of our earlier conversations about how that motivates you and really helps you keep going, and it enriches relationships that you have in cancer. But I agree that it's sort of a double-edged sword, so you want to plan, but you don't want to make plans that you have to cancel. I find myself doing that the week before scans, and send a quick email that says, oh, I'll get back to you after I have my scans next week, because especially since I'm traveling for my trial, my life could change pretty significantly um, in a very short period of time.
Definitely. I was speaking with someone last week who actually doesn't even have a cancer diagnosis, but he called me because he knew that my life had been impacted by cancer for the last 5 years, and scans were a normal rhythm, like you said, in my life. And he called me just sort of to let out all this anxiety and to acknowledge all the things he took for granted in my life. And he went in for a colonoscopy, and after the scan, they called him and said, like, it's undetermined what we see here, so you need to continue to fast and then come back in a couple of days, and we'll look at it more in depth. And just the experience of not knowing, even if it's just for 2 days at this point, not knowing what that means, right? Not knowing what your future could hold, whether this unknown question of what they saw means they really saw something and they don't want to tell you about it, or if they really don't know what they saw and they can't even figure out what's going on. All of the emotions that came up in him for these 2 days, plus the additional the fasting. And for him, he's already on antidepressants, and so this throwing him off emotionally while not eating and not processing his meds correctly and waiting for this sort of weight of this bad news to hit him. He said he'd never had a lower moment in his entire life, like, and he doesn't even have sort of the emotional baggage that goes with this scan, right? He just has this one procedure and he could feel this weight in that moment. And he called just to tell me, but also I think to acknowledge like how much we internalize because we don't want to be a burden to our friends and family. We don't want to appear irrational, but we just have so much emotional burden around this momentary scan. And he wanted to acknowledge that. And I just thought that that was really beautiful for me. I'm sorry he had to go through so much, but it was good for me to know that, like, now when I mention I have a scan, I'm sort of going to have an ally saying, I know how you're feeling.
And I think you and I are both parents, and you mentioned, friends and family, but I think also there's additional anxiety associated with not giving your kids anxiety about your scans, right? Because things could change, but depending on the age of them, it may or may not be appropriate to tell them, what the scans bring. Because, like I said, this every 6-week cycle of worrying isn't necessarily something our bodies were designed to go through. It doesn't facilitate a lot of healing. So protecting my kids from it provides an additional layer of anxiety for me personally. I don't know if you feel the same thing, but every time we've had questionable scans or something like that, we definitely hold back a little bit of information and try and get more and process it before we let them in, because I don't want them to feel like every time I go for scans that it could be horrible news.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about it during parenting or not, but we don't want to hurt our kids, right? We're here to protect them and to keep them safe, and so to give them news every 6 weeks that something big could be coming, that as you travel for treatment, your kids are traveling with you, so that their life could get turned upside down and their plans could get undone. We don't want to put this on our children, but we also don't want to create walls between us and them because they can tell something's wrong with us and we're not sharing that. So there's this big weight that's going back and forth in our minds about how much we should give them, how much we should hold to ourselves, how much can we bear without sort of breaking our relationship and being honest with how we feel inside. And making sure that they don't think for some reason we're angry at them. Like if they see us upset and we're not talking about it, make sure they don't think we're angry at them or they're anyone else in their life. These are all, as a parent, these are all very heavy burdens. My scan is a little traumatic on my children because after my scan, I can't be in the room with them for a couple of days because of the radiation, and my body is sort of leaking out. And I don't know how to say that. I said one time at scans that, oh, I get to go home and be radioactive. And they all laughed at me. But I was like, well, I don't know what I am. I just know that I have radiation coming out and I can't be with people. But it's a really big deal to them. It may not feel like a big thing to someone else, but that they can't be in the room with me for 36 hours is like this huge thing. And every time I go to a doctor, they all like get around me. They're like, can we touch you? Can we be with you when you get home? And I'm like, yeah, this is just a normal appointment. They're like, oh, okay, okay. It's like, okay. But it's like every time I go out to a treatment or something, they worry about how it's impacting them, right? It's like, we're all, I guess, naturally sort of selfish. Like we want to make sure it's going to be okay for us too. And so our children are experiencing these highs and lows, these rhythms of cancer with us.
Um, I think when you're in active treatment too, depending on how your body is handling treatment, the constant uncertainty of that. I don't know if you ever had to have your treatment delayed due to low counts or anything like that, but kids thrive on a schedule. So when I was diagnosed, my youngest was in kindergarten, and he would know, like, every other Wednesday, mom would come with the pump, so I have a take home chemo pump. And the days that I didn't have it raised a lot of questions for a 6-year-old. And you just sort of, I try to support him and tell as much as I can to inform him without making it worse, but also letting him know that I respect him and want him to be informed and understand what's going on, because sometimes I think holding back too much information isn't good either.
Definitely. Yeah. That was one piece of parenting advice I've had in 5 years from a doctor at Stanford. And she said, yeah, if you hold back, then that actually creates a break in your relationship, break in your trust. So you have to give them maybe not the exact terms, but some kind of trust. Like you have to express what you're going through in some way, so that they can feel like they're a part of your life. Um, Going back to skin anxiety, and what suggestion would you have for a family member or a friend who knew you had a scan coming up, and they wanted to just acknowledge you, or be a part of it with you in some way? Do you have any suggestions on how they could do that?
I think what you just experienced with your friend is the best thing that you can do, by just acknowledging that this experience is hard and I'm with you, and I know, that you're struggling right now. You don't have to say, I know what you're going through, or I feel the same way you do. I think that that can end up being a little bit triggering sometimes for some people, but just to say, like, I'm aware that you're more anxious, or I'm aware that you are worried, and I'm here for you, and let me know what I can do for you. I think especially in the relationship with your primary caregiver, whether that's a spouse or an adult child, if you're older, or if it's your parent, I think it's really good to keep the line of communication open, about how you're feeling, and maybe communicate when you're not in a pre-scan time about how you guys can best address it when scan anxiety hits. And if it gets bad, like maybe you have a routine or a safe word or something to take a break, because I know, like I said, my coping mechanism is cleaning or doing a house project, but I know there's a lot of people, and I do get more like this closer to the scans, who get just short and snippy with their family. So it's not healthy.
Yeah, and of course it's misinterpreted because other people may not be thinking about the scan. It may not be on their radar at all. Instead, they just hear you shutting down or pulling away or being grouchy in some way. Um, yeah, I was thinking about how the period between your scan and the time your doctor calls. And then there's like, so there's the pre-scan anxiety, and then there's this waiting moment, right? This void time where your scan is done, and from the minute you walk out that door, you're just waiting for your doctor to call. And if it's bad news, they call that day, probably after 6, because they get off work and then they have to fit you into their schedule. So if the phone rings in the evening of that day, you're definitely going to break into tears and be, even if it's not your doctor, you're just going to melt down. But if they don't call you because it's good news, but they forget to call you and it's been a day or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, then this anxiety just keeps going inside of you, and you're still just waiting sort of on the edge of your seat to find out what your future looks like.
Yeah, I've made the mistake of scheduling meetings or something similar the night of scans, and I think, oh, it'll get my mind off of it. But twice I have been at someone else's house when I got bad news. So that's something I'm not going to do anymore. A little smarter about my schedule, but because that's really hard, because then that person who may be, someone that you're meeting with semi-professionally, or, just a friend, but they have to process that moment with you, which, or you hold it inside and try to make it home. I don't know, like, it's definitely not ideal. So that's something that I would recommend to people is maybe plan an activity at home, not anticipating bad news, but preventing sort of this sort of chaos if you do get bad news.
Yeah, as a family, it might be good to acknowledge these milestones in your process and just like have a favorite meal that's going to be prepared. And every night after a scan, you all sit down together and maybe you can talk about the good that's happened over since the last scan, or how I'm like, tell my little kids, like, yeah, I got an A on my test. Like, talk about what you did or how you have prepared for your tests, because for the kids, they don't really understand what's going on here. So I'm like, mom's been eating really well. This is why I don't eat this, or I exercise or whatever, so that I can get an A on this test because I want to be strong and healthy for you. And but if we were all going to sit down and create like a milestone around these scans, then we could at least acknowledge the moments of the past and acknowledge all the good, so that if a moment does come where the scan is bad, well, at least they have experience of good things as well, so they don't think this is the only time our family comes together all in a huddle, after a scan. Like, there's good, I mean, there might be a bad moment, and there could be a few more good ones, and there could be a bad one, but they'd be able to balance it out as a rhythm inside of the family where there are good and bad things side by side.
The rhythm of it, I think, is like such a important thing to take note of too. It's like very regular. So like I say, this cycle of sort of like high alert, low alert gets to be exhausting at times, and with me, we're adding in travel. So it's like high alert and travel worry, which the RV has taken away a lot of the concern over that. So that's been a big blessing. But actually, that is part of what fed into the need for having an RV, because it was clear that the scans brought enough stress and I didn't need anything extra helping. Um, but what do you think also about acquaintances or friends? I mean, right now we have less interactions with acquaintances and friends, but we will get back to it at some point. So I always wonder how to support people, or even like my children's teachers, things like that. Do you have any strategies for that?
For bringing them in around the scans, around the rhythms of cancer.
Yeah, just so they can be aware that this is something our family goes through regularly. And of course, you don't need to tell everyone you meet, but someone like a teacher or someone that's regular in your life, maybe a friend that you see semi regularly, but they're not looped in on all your details. So they can know to give you a little extra patience during that time.
Yeah, definitely. When I was in a stronger chemo and had a lot more scans, mine are 3 months apart right now, so that feels like a huge space of time. But I definitely would communicate with the teacher, be like I'm going in for this. I don't know how the evening will go. We may not get to our homework tonight. Like, we may not show up tomorrow, but like, it's all around this one issue. And if everything flows beautifully, then you'll know that it was good news for our family. But if everything sort of falls apart for 48 hours, you'll know why, and so that at least they have some kind of sensitivity around what's happening, and they're not badgering the kids if they show up the next day without half their books or whatever, because I'm just not in a state to prepare the children to go to school. So I do think it's only wise, not only wise, but it's honoring to tell the people outside of your life that don't know these details what's going on in these moments, so that they don't sort of come back in their natural state and like badger your children or whatever about they're lacking at school, but instead they can have the opportunity to extend grace and forgiveness for things that may not work out beautifully at school. But if we don't communicate as parents, then the teachers don't have the opportunity to alter their natural response and be a support to the children. So I do think there's a responsibility on us to communicate to those. We can't just ask teachers to be supportive if we're not telling teachers what's going on, right? Same thing for our friends, really. We have to be able to open up enough that people have the option to respond. But if we don't open up, then, they don't even have the information they need to respond in a caring kind of way.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's sort of like the takeaway that we talk about so much is that communication is key. And I know part of your mission with adventure therapy is like reducing isolation. So, in COVID specific terms, when families like mine, where I'm on this experimental treatment, so we have to be really, really cautious, we're experiencing isolation anyway, but isolating people socially just adds to that. So, and I think when we talk about the people who have died this year, a lot of them went through the end of their life in isolation. I had one friend who spent 6 of the last 7 weeks of her life in isolation, not because she had COVID, but because the hospice center where she was, or the cancer center where she was, um, wasn't allowing visitors, and eventually I think her family just decided to bring her home. But that's not the way this is supposed to end. Um, and I think, as a cancer patient, sometimes you push people away, or there are people who just fall away because it's emotionally trying. But if we do our best to um, support those relationships and communicate about the anxiety, maybe that will also help keep the relationship strong and not make it so things completely fall apart when you have these outbursts or hard time or bad news where you go away for a little bit and nobody knows what's going on.
Definitely. I was thinking about how you're saying people fall away. And, I'm reading some about empathy and talking, having conversations around empathy. And I think that it's important, not just for us, for people to not fall away, but for them, because they were going to have regrets in their life because of the uncertainty of not bringing any kind of small interaction with you, whether it's a text or a call or going out of their way to come to, see you, drop something off or whatever. But it's not just for us, right? It's for the people who were in our lives, who are no longer in our lives because of cancer. They are going to have regrets moving forward because they did not have the courage or the knowledge or the certainty enough to come and be a part of our life during this messy, chaotic process of cancer, right? And so it's not just about the patient. It's about the community that already existed around a person before they were a patient, making sure that community has, the resolution they need, the clear conscience, whatever it is, and so that they don't live with regret. And I think it's important for everyone to interact. And nobody knows how to manage cancer when you're diagnosed. Nobody around me was a cancer expert when I was diagnosed, and they didn't know what to do either. And so we're not expecting perfection out of the people in our life. What happens is years and years and years go by, we're still here, and people still aren't talking to us. And you could have learned in those years how to get better as a friend with me and cancer. But instead, the silence just continued. And now it's sort of like, what happens next? So I think that it's important for us as patients to be kind even when people say the wrong things, so that people aren't scared off and like just stop trying, right? But it's also important, for others to try to say anything even if it's not the right thing, and be brave in that, because they're not dealing with the cancer. So it is a two-way thing, but it's two-way for the mutual beneficial growth of us as humans. It's very important.
Yes. That's definitely, you and I talked before about sort of feeling like people have started mourning you before you're gone. And that's obviously not like a good state of mind to live in when you are doing really hard things to try and stay alive. So yeah, I think you're right. People, even if they, and no one's going to be perfect all the time. I say the wrong thing all the time and I am living it, like I had a friend who had a recurrence last week and she's going through some of the side effects of the recurrence. And I just didn't know what to say at first. And I ended up just saying, like, it's hard. It's hard. I agree. I don't know what else to tell you, but it's not easy.
I sat with someone last night for an hour after the kids went to bed, and she had a recurrence in last week and was in the hospital. And, you know, it's her whole life started to change last week. And yeah, I just listened, and I knew the weight of the disappointment. I knew what that depth of despair could feel like. I knew that she's going to be there for a while, and this wouldn't be the only conversation she would need to have. But there weren't words. There's nothing we can do to fix it. It's not our job to fix it. It's our job to listen and to know that they have someone to call, anyone to call, who can listen and who can just say, I'm sorry, this is so hard, this is so hard. Um, and make sure that they know they don't have to do anything for me. I'm not trying to fix anything for them. We're just going to do this with each other. And that's all we can do, is just make sure we're doing it with one another, and no one has to do it alone. Um, but yeah, even us, we don't know the right things to say. It's just knowing we're not going to run away. And I think that's the hardest thing is, what they say the opposite of love is not hate. It's like being unaware, like you don't even pay attention, you're not responding anyway. And I think that is so true. The opposite of what we experience is not hate. Nobody hates us for this. They just simply disappear, dissolve. And I do want to point something out about the cancer experience, especially for you, Jessica, is that with your treatments, you're not really allowed to talk about what kind of treatments you're going through, not even maybe your side effects and all the ways cancer is impacting you. You're not even allowed to talk about it, or else you would lose your treatment. So when people want to come into your life, they can't really talk to you about maybe what you're going through. So how would you suggest people do approach you if someone wanted to enter and be a part of your life again?
That's a really good question. So first of all, I want to say, because I do share some details, that I am not on a blind study, which is when they do a trial where you're not even supposed to know if you're having the drug or not. Those are the ones where the patient is really bound by confidentiality. This one is more like you can talk about it, but it comes with some potential repercussions and maybe negative attention, or just complications. So it's easier to not talk about it, because as a cancer patient, we're always looking for the next best drug, because eventually there'll be a drug that comes along that makes this, a disease that you just live with, like type 1 diabetes, and you take a daily medication. That's sort of how I see the evolution of cancer treatment going. But when you open yourself up talking about being on a clinical trial and you have a bit of success, people start to pay attention, and it can put a lot of pressure on you, or it can put pressure on the trial itself. I need to be really careful about that. I do talk in some of my closed communities, but as someone who was very public with my cancer journey before, that has been extremely hard. And I did actually have a friend who has colorectal cancer reach out to me back in, I don't know, must have been like September. And she just said, "We haven't been hearing that much from you. I just want to make sure you're okay." And I said, I have always been vulnerable and open about what I'm doing. I've shared how many rounds of chemo I had, or what kind of treatment I was on, all kinds of stuff. I was very open about it. And now I'm in this position where that's maybe not the ideal thing to do. And I am struggling with what voice do I have otherwise, because I think that my voice was really focused on my cancer experience and how you can support colorectal cancer patients through treatment. And she added me to a group text, and it's been life changing, because I just have this, very tight knit small community of people who all have stage 4 colorectal cancer, and no one's looking to expose what anyone's on or try and hop on the trial you're on or anything like that. It's just emotional support, and it's been incredible, because for me, I mean, and everyone's different, but for me, sharing about my experience and having people give feedback, that me sharing that experience actually helped me cope with the stress of cancer. It gives me a distraction, really.
Well, more than a distraction, it gives it a purpose. Like sharing your story gives somebody else some information to start with, right? And so they can say, well, I saw that this worked for so long with this person. I know what to expect if I can possibly get on these similar meds, if I can follow in her footsteps, and look at how much time I can get, right? And so it gives you purpose by giving other people hope, right? And that's so much of what we want in traumatic situations, is to turn that trauma into some kind of purposeful hope, because it gives us something to focus on besides the trauma, the pain, the hurt. And that's obviously what I want to do with my story, is to turn it into something that helps other people move forward. And I never know how long I'll do it or how well I'll do it, but I just know I get up and do it every day. And hopefully over time, these conversations, the footprints, the stones we put into the makes a path, right, for other people to start on. At least they know where to start. At least they have faces or voices or stories that they can connect with, and that creates hope. And hope leads us so far sometimes when you are in this tunnel visioned kind of moment. If you can just find something small to hang on to, like a group text, and they can just pull you a little bit farther, out of your darkness, out of that moment where it's easy to get sucked in, right? It's easy to get sucked into isolation or fear. But if you can just pull you forward a little bit forward, then you can keep going and be reminded why you're doing all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I really, that's probably more of it than I was even aware of, and um, I'll never necessarily agree with the expression, like, if my cancer helps one person, then it served its purpose, because I wish no one had cancer. Um, but it definitely fuels the journey when people tell you, I have been reading what you've been talking about, and this helps me understand. Recently in colorectal cancer, there was some research that a friend brought up to me that um, long responders to first line therapy very frequently have a very short response to second line therapy. And it's not actually specific to which therapy it is, because both of these drugs are used interchangeably in different orders. They're both technically a first line drug. But I was one of those people that had a really long response to my first line therapy. I had 25 rounds of a drug that most people only make it to 6 or 8. And the real upper limit is 12. But I got really lucky and had an exceptional run on it. But I expected, because I had seen so many people do so well on the second line therapy, they have, I was at 25 rounds already, so that people will have 30, 40, 50 rounds more on this second line therapy. And mine stopped working after 8 treatments.
Mm.
And that blindsided me. That was one of those nights where I went for scans and then went to someone's house and then got the phone call from my doctor. I was actually at a Girl Scout leader meeting, and the friend that was hosting, gave me the look right when I got up. She knew it wasn't good news. And I'll, of course, never forget that moment at all. It's burned into my memory. But those moments are, I don't know, that's a hard experience. But knowing that it's coming, or that it's a possibility that it wouldn't work as well, even though it's, I don't want to live worrying that it's not going to work. At least if I knew, like, hey, my long time on my first type of treatment might mean that I don't get a long time on this second treatment, and I might have to change my plan sooner than anticipated. That might have given me a little bit of a heads up, because when we got that news, it was pretty chaotic because we were totally unprepared. I think with cancer, usually you try and have a plan B, plan C, And we just completely didn't have a backup plan at the moment because I had literally just started the second treatment.
Yeah, which takes us back to the scans, right? Scanxiety. Those moments when you get that doctor's appointment or doctor's call in the evening, I have one that I will be able to relive in my mind probably forever, because my first big progression was, I scheduled it the last day of school before Christmas break, and I had invited all the kids in the class over to watch the Polar Express, and I had all this food out, and it was laying on the table. And my husband had worked night shift, so he was still asleep, and I was expecting like 30 kids to show up in an hour, and I had my scan that morning. It was no big deal. There's nothing to worry about. And standing in the kitchen with like a tray of cookies in my hand, and with Christmas carols on, and powdered sugar everywhere. And my doctor calls, and she can't even say it. She just says, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Like, she just couldn't even say it. And it's just that moment, right? Your life, you can feel your life stopping right then. You just feel it. And I just had to run upstairs and try to separate myself from my kids. And then just, there's no processing. It's just a mourning effect. You're just mourning the loss, because it starts with this moment and this party, but it continues in all your future that might be compromised from then on. And it's just, there's so many of those moments. So it's not just laying on a table and being scanned, it's the moments that follow. It's the phone calls. It's
The
the
phone call is really hard. I sorry to interrupt,
oh,
but
fine.
my doctor is out of the area. So if I see that area code or if I see private number show up on my phone, oh, that moment is very hard.
It's very hard, yeah. And I like to read the report myself. I don't always trust that my doctor is going to tell me the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So I like wait for that report to come out. I'm like checking like every hour, waiting to see it, because I want to read what it says about me, the whole story, not just it looks pretty good or whatever. I want to see like exactly where there's a new spot and what it's doing and how it's affecting me. Um, so there's a lot of processing. I guess the point is there's a lot of processing, what good or bad, whether you're in treatment or you're a survivor of, 5 years, there's still this processing that has to happen between your flashbacks to your very first time your life got interrupted, to all those treatments that hung on a good report, whether or not they were working, to the moments that were interrupted in your future because of progression, moving forward to all these other moments. There's a lot of processing that happens and is relived in and around the scans. It's not just a day, it's like weeks. It can be even a month, I would say, on either side, waiting and processing the results. It's a big deal. It's a big rhythm in the cancer experience. Well, I'm glad we got an opportunity to talk about this. Like I said, we really want to build empathy around the cancer experience, with us and our friends and our families and anyone who listens in, so that we can understand what's sort of happening in the psychology of cancer. There's not a lot of conversation around these very specific moments and experiences. And so we just want to take moments to have conversations and create that place so that people can learn and grow, and we can all get better at supporting one another as we move forward in life. So, Jessica, thank you so much for being here and having this talk with me today.
Thank you.
And I look forward to speaking with you next time. And we look forward to more good news and good scan reports.
Thank you.
Alrighty. We'll talk to you soon.